2. Good morning. Welcome to another Sunday, where we speak about topics. This Sunday, we'll be speaking to you like you're a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old about topics of the week. Let me go ahead and introduce our panel that will be doing these illustrious and intellectual things. Starting from my left, Frank C. Hevington.
Bonjour.
Good morning, Frank.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous, Jeffrey Huila?
I'm going to take that as a good morning because I don't know what hooped up language that was that you were speaking. Then I'll move on to Gainesville, Florida, where we've got count them, 2 individuals on one camera shot. Starting with Ziggy Michelle Lynch. Say good morning. Hello. And she has brought with us an illustrious guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name's Hartley. I'm a friend of Michelle's and a teacher in Orlando.
Someone who actually knows a thing or two. All right, well, it's nice to have more intelligence on the cast. I'll move to our...
We can certainly use it.
That is correct. So I will move on to our most northern colleague here, Thomas Holmes. Say good morning, Tom.
Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all.
Good morning. And, of course, my name is Jeff Wheeler out here under the Gold Dome in Atlanta, Georgia. Good morning.
Hi. Well, that's a great intro, Jeff, and welcome. Happy New Year to everybody.
Yeah,
by the
Happy
way.
New Year.
Podcast episode 365. What?
That's actually not accurate at all. That's not even close to accurate.
Well, it helps when I hear your wonderful booming voice underneath the Gold Dome.
Boom.
So, what
All
is
right.
on the docket this week, sir?
The dockets. I will read this, but I don't understand it. Are journalists freedom fighters?
Journalists, freedom fighters.
I'll give you my opinion, which is uneducated and unbeknownst, and I will go with journalists aren't typically freedom fighters. In rare exception, they are. Most times, I think journalists are doing a job, which means that they are giving people what they want.
Huh?
And the journalists write stories and do stories that the audience is looking for. And so therefore they're not doing anything to fight for freedom. Most journalists, most of the time, do that. There are certainly marked exceptions, but in general, that's my stance. Now, disprove.
Can we start with a simple request on my part, which is, I see the word freedom fighters. What do we mean by that? Can I get a little bit of clarification as to what that
Che
means
Rivera.
to people here?
Che Rivera.
That's just a word or somebody's name or something.
So, Che who?
Che Rivera, the guy with the Bob Marley shirts. Isn't that Che Rivera?
the Che Guevara?
Che Guevara, yes. You know I failed phonics in fourth
Che
grade.
Rivera was a wonderful fashion icon in the late 70s. Che Guevara is a revolutionary
Yes.
in the
And-
50s, 60s.
So is he a freedom fighter and a journalist at the same time? Go.
I don't think he was ever a journalist.
Che Guevara?
Yeah.
He was never a journalist.
Martin Luther King Jr. Was he a freedom fighter or a journalist?
Neither.
Freedom fighter?
He's asking you to define freedom fighter before we go down this road too long.
Well, they're bringing up topics to the mainstream. How can they not be both?
How can they not be a journalist? You have to write stories to be a journalist.
Okay. MLJ Jr. did sermons. How is that not a story?
Ooh, deep.
Writing about people's struggles.
He's a storyteller, I grant you. But it is what media did he go across with that? And I would
Okay.
say that a journalist has to be some sort of permanent media, whether it be on video or audio or written word. It is a permanent record of what they said at one given moment that you can go back to and refer to. A sermon being an espousal, a speech, but therefore is not a journalist. So therefore a herald that would stand in the corner and speak of the news of the day would not be journalism. But the story he was reading out to the people would then therefore be journalism.
Okay, so like Thomas Paine.
Wrote his stories, wrote his words, and so therefore it can be looked up word for word. That is, to me, what makes it the journalism.
So you would say Thomas Paine was a journalist
And a freedom fighter.
and a freedom fighter. Okay. Just want to make
So,
sure.
Tom, I'm going to go with freedom fighter is someone who works, not necessarily tirelessly, but works with some fervor towards what they believe is a more free society. In the
Okay.
generally political realm. It doesn't mean they
Okay.
have to be successful.
Wow.
And it doesn't mean that they have to do it the way that you think it ought to be done, but they're fighting for what they internally believe is a freer world.
That's a very Western way to look at
So
it.
maybe to bring geometry in here, maybe it's one of those things like, where a square is a rhombus, but a rhombus is not necessarily a square. So
Go
a journalist
on.
can be a freedom fighter, but it doesn't necessarily mean that some journalists are you know what I'm saying? Like some journalists
Some
can be
journalists
freedom
can
fighters,
be freedom
but,
fighters, but not all freedom
but
fighters
it's not
are
inherently
journalists.
an absolute.
Right.
I like that. Not to pipe in, but I mean,
No.
You're
Well-
required to pipe in.
Here's the deal. I feel like you have to consider where the journalist is writing from. So, if it's a journalist writing from an American institution, then they're simply exercising their freedom that's already granted to them in the Constitution. However, if that journalist is maybe writing from a country with more restrictive freedom of speech laws, then by writing or posting or being a journalist and reporting on news.
So a Chinese journalist that just writes about what is happening in the West is therefore a freedom fighter?
I don't know.
Because they are just, say they are rewriting in Chinese stories that they have read elsewhere because they have some sort of magical access to the outside world, and therefore they rewrite those in Chinese.
This is a translator. You're just talking about translator, Jeff.
Well, no, but say they're writing about the news that's happening elsewhere, and they're putting their own spin on it, writing their own story about the things that happened. I mean, lots of
who is
people
their
take the
audience,
AP
then?
feed, but they do it in a closed-minded, not allowed to write these kinds of stories world, such as the current Chinese philosophy, if you will.
In that case, maybe they, yes, would be freedom fighters because they're fighting through their form of expression to advance certain freedoms of expression that are not in their country already. But if you take a journalist from the Western world, they're exercising their freedom of expression, but maybe not necessarily fighting for it.
Although we could say that even in the Western world, those people, as long as you keep occupying the vacuum, if you were not to exercise those rights, then someone kind of takes that,
That's right.
give them an inch and
That's
they'll take a
very
mile.
true.
It's like,
You
oh,
haven't
it's-
used them in the last 10 years, so I guess this isn't important to you.
Right.
An unexercised right is basically no longer exists under common law.
Right. That's
Oh, like privacy. So Edward
Privacy.
Snowden is a journalist and a freedom fighter.
Edward Snowden is not the journalist in that endeavor, but he is the freedom fighter who has joined up with a journalist to state the story.
Okay, what about the guy that's the head of WikiLeaks?
Julian Assange. I don't think that he's the one who wrote, really. I don't think that he's the one who created the record. Because to me, a journalist creates the record of note, right? So whether that be in whatever media, he creates a record of note. And if that record of note has a battle against the current state of affairs in a concept that moves towards freedom, I would give them both a freedom fighter and a journalist.
Well, but couldn't you say that someone like an Assange or maybe even a Snowden, maybe more in the Assange line, it falls in the line with the investigative journalist? Because I think there are types of journalists. There's a journalist who a fire happens, they go out, they interview the people,
Right.
they document what happened, and
Right.
they cut to print. Then
Right.
there you have your investigative journalists, your Bob Woodwards, your people really kind of who is the guy who finally is being vindicated for exposing that the CIA was not implicitly involved, but looking the other way as cocaine from governments in Central America was being brought to L.A. He blew the story up, lost his job, was vilified, and now the CIA has been like, yeah, we did that. So you have the investigative journalist who is actively fighting to expose the lies, and so where someone like maybe an Assange who is, maybe he's just like putting things out there, but he's actively saying, send me secrets because I want to expose what governments are doing. The chicanery that's going on behind the scenes, doesn't that make him a little bit of he's fighting for the freedom of truth, and almost being maybe he's not writing as well or explicitly, maybe he's just dumping the information, but he is acting almost like an investigative journalist, no?
Yeah. And it's investigative, or is somebody basically grinding an axe? And I would say that a freedom fighter that is a journalist generally grinds an axe when they're out there doing it. Which is sad, but it is what it is,
An investigative journalist is grinding an axe?
No. A freedom fighter that's a journalist is generally grinding an axe. They're generally out there working their cause.
Well, I think there needs to be some element of risk taken in order to be a freedom fighter. So if the nature of their job, if their job title is investigative journalist, then perhaps that's just what they should be doing. They should be doing their job by investigating. Now, if they happen to be a journalist who is probing a little bit deeper and maybe could even get themselves in trouble for some of their, is at risk of perhaps losing their job or losing their credibility for some of the information that they find out, then maybe that's a little bit more on the fighter, to the tech, that word fighter. They're fighting for something.
Right.
Actually, I really like the distinction of, there's that, I love that distinction of doing your job versus kind of going above and beyond the point where you may be at best worse losing your job, at worst losing everything.
And not only that, are they aware of the risks that they're taking?